Hey everyone, thanks for being here. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what you're doing right now. Are you working, studying, just relaxing? I want to know. Here's what you need to know before we start. I made a choice that cost me everything. Not in a single moment of violence or hatred, but through 1,000 small decisions that added up to one unforgivable absence. Now I'm trapped in a place between destinations, and I just discovered that the thing I thought would save me might be the only thing that can make me face what I've done. Let's begin. I'm standing in front of the tree right now and everyone else is gone. That's the first thing you need to understand. For weeks we planned this. 5 of us, all desperate in our own ways, all convinced that the fruit hanging from those ancient branches held the answer to whatever question had landed us in this gray wasteland. Now it's just me in the silence, and I can't remember why I thought this was worth it. The air here doesn't move the way it should. In Purgatory, everything exists in a state of suspension. Not quite real, not quite imaginary. The atmosphere presses against your skin like wet fabric, and there's always this low hum in the background, like the universe is holding its breath. I've been here for what feels like years, though time doesn't work the same way it did before. Days blur together. Moments stretch and compress without warning. The tree stands about 50 yards from heaven's gates, which glow with a light so pure it hurts to look at directly. I've tried approaching them before in my early days here. Got within maybe 20 feet before the weight of my own inadequacy drove me back. It wasn't the angels that stopped me. They never even acknowledged my presence. It was something inside me, some fundamental wrongness that recognized I didn't belong there. Hell's entrance lies in the opposite direction, down a slope that descends into shadows thick enough to touch. I've never gone close to that one. The smell alone, sulfur and decay and something else, something that reminds me of hospital corridors and funeral homes, keeps me at a distance. Sometimes I hear voices drifting up from down there, but I can't make out the words. Maybe that's a mercy. Between these two destinations, growing like it has every right to exist, stands the tree of original sin. It's enormous, easily 300 feet tall, with bark that looks almost metallic in certain light. The branches spread out in patterns that seem intentional, mathematical, like someone designed them according to principles I can't quite grasp. And the fruit, God, the fruit. Each apple glows with this inner radiance, shifting colors depending on the angle. Sometimes they look golden, sometimes deep crimson, sometimes a purple so dark it's almost black. I've watched souls approach this tree before, watched them reach for the fruit with trembling hands, convinced they'd finally found their salvation. Most of them disappeared the moment they touched it, pulled into portals that opened like wounds in the air. A few managed to pluck an apple free, and those ones, they changed. I saw a woman consume one once, and her entire form shifted, became something more solid, more real than anything else in this place. She walked toward Hell's entrance afterward, moving with purpose and power, like she'd finally found her true nature. The angels guard this tree with absolute dedication. They don't speak, don't threaten, don't negotiate. They simply exist as an impenetrable barrier between the desperate and the forbidden. I've seen them reduce souls to nothing with just a glance, watch them open portals that swallow trespassers whole. They're not cruel about it, they're not anything about it. They just maintain the order of things. Until today, apparently. My name is, well, my name doesn't matter anymore. I left that behind along with everything else when I arrived here. But I can tell you who I was. A person who made choices. Bad ones mostly. Not the dramatic kind you see in stories. Not murder or betrayal or grand theft. Just the slow erosion of connection, the gradual abandonment of the people who loved me most. I met Daniela on my 3rd day in Purgatory. She found me sitting near one of the countless gray buildings that dot this landscape, structures that might have been homes once but now just serve as markers, reminders of what we left behind. I was staring at my hands, still not quite believing this was real, when she sat down next to me. "First week's always the hardest," she said. Her voice had this quiet authority to it, The kind nurses develop after years of dealing with the worst humans can offer. You're still trying to make sense of it. Trust me, that passes. What comes after, I asked. Acceptance, then boredom, then desperation. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. I'm somewhere between the last two. Daniela had been a nurse in Chicago, worked in the emergency room at Northwestern Memorial for 15 years. She told me about the night everything changed for her. The night she made a decision that seemed right in the moment but ended up costing her everything. A patient came in, critical condition, needed immediate care. Another patient, stable but deteriorating, needed monitoring. She chose wrong, made a judgment call that seemed logical at the time. The stable patient crashed while she was focused elsewhere, and by the time she got back, it was too late. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said, staring at the unchanging sky. But intent doesn't matter much when someone's kid dies on your watch. She'd spent her remaining years trying to make up for it, working double shifts, volunteering, donating everything she earned to medical charities. None of it helped. The guilt followed her all the way here, where it solidified into something she couldn't escape. The tree, she told me one day, several weeks after we met. That's the way out. That's how you move forward. I'd heard rumors about the tree by then. Everyone in Purgatory knows the stories. Eat the fruit, gain power beyond measure. Strength to rival demons. Vision that penetrates all lies. The ability to finally take control of your own existence instead of drifting in this endless gray. You really think it works? I asked. I think it's the only thing here that offers any kind of change, she said. Everything else is just stasis. Waiting. I'm tired of waiting. Raymond joined us about a month later. He approached our usual meeting spot, a bench near what might have once been a park, with the kind of calculated confidence that immediately set me on edge. Everything about him seemed measured, from the way he walked to the pauses between his words. I've been watching you two, he said, settling onto the bench without invitation. You talk about the tree like it's some kind of fairy tale. I'm here to tell you it's not. He laid out his research, if you could call it that. Raymond had apparently spent his time in Purgatory gathering information, talking to other souls, mapping the patterns of the angelic guards. He'd documented shift changes that weren't really shifts, identified moments when the tree's protection seemed less absolute. There's a window, he said. Brief, but real. Every 72 hours, there's a period of maybe 10 minutes when the guardian's attention divides. Something pulls them away. I haven't figured out what, but during that window, the tree is vulnerable. And you want to, Daniela started. I want to take what should have been ours all along, Raymond finished. The power to choose our own path, to stop being victims of circumstance and actually control our fate. I should have recognized the obsession in his voice, should have understood that people who end up in Purgatory, people like us, we don't just want power, we want redemption disguised as power. We want to believe that if we just had enough strength, enough knowledge, enough control, we could go back and fix everything. But I didn't recognize it then. Or maybe I did and chose not to see it. Count me in, I said. Daniela looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she nodded. Me too. We spent the next several weeks preparing. Raymond brought in two others. Mitchell, who'd been some kind of financial consultant before ending up here, and Lynn, who never talked much about her previous life but moved with the kind of grace that suggested dance training or martial arts. Neither of them seemed particularly motivated by redemption. They just wanted out, wanted forward motion of any kind. The planning sessions took place in an abandoned structure that might have been a church once. The architecture suggested worship, but the emptiness suggested abandonment. We'd gather there after what passed for nightfall in Purgatory, a dimming of the ambient light that never quite became true darkness, and Raymond would go over the details again and again. The approach needs to be fast, he'd say, pointing to crude maps he'd drawn on salvaged paper. Once they notice us, we have maybe 30 seconds before the portals open. That means we split up, come at the tree from multiple angles. Some of us won't make it. That's just reality. But if even one person reaches the fruit, we've succeeded. Succeeded at what, exactly? Mitchell asked during one of these sessions. Say we get the fruit. Say we eat it. Then what? We're just more powerful souls trapped in the same place? No, Raymond said with absolute certainty. The power isn't the point. The power is the means. Once we have it, we can force our way into heaven or hell. We can stop waiting for judgment and just move on. I'm not sure any of us really believed that, but we wanted to believe it badly enough that we stopped asking difficult questions. The night before our attempt, I couldn't settle. I walked the perimeter of my designated space, a small room in one of the gray buildings that served as home, shelter, prison, all at once. The walls had no decorations, no personal touches. In Purgatory, you don't accumulate things. You just exist in proximity to emptiness. I was staring out the window at the tree, visible even from this distance, when Daniela knocked on my door. Can't sleep either, she asked. Sleep doesn't really happen here, I said. Just periods of reduced awareness. She came in and sat on the floor, back against the wall. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you really doing this? The question should have been simple. I'd told myself the answer 100 times. For power. For escape. For the chance to move beyond this static existence. But with Daniela looking at me, her expression open and genuinely curious, I found I couldn't voice any of those rehearsed responses. I guess I'm tired of feeling powerless, I finally said. That's not really an answer, she said gently. We're all powerless here, that's the nature of this place, but you, there's something else, something you're not saying. I almost told her then, almost explained about my mother, about the choices I made, about the absence that followed me like a shadow even here. But the words stuck in my throat, and instead I just shrugged. Tomorrow's going to be dangerous, I said, changing the subject. Raymond's plan. It's not as solid as he thinks it is. I know, Daniela said, but it's better than waiting forever. She left shortly after that, and I spent the rest of the night thinking about power and what it really means. In my old life, I'd thought power was the ability to make choices without consequence. Choose my relationship over family obligations. Choose convenience over connection. Choose absence over presence. That had felt like power at the time, the freedom to prioritize myself without guilt. Now, standing on the edge of attempting something that could erase me from existence entirely, I was starting to understand that maybe I'd had the definition wrong all along. The next morning, though morning and evening don't mean much in a place where the light never truly changes, we gathered at the designated meeting point. Raymond went over the plan one final time. Mitchell kept checking and rechecking equipment that wasn't really equipment, more like tools we'd fashioned from the ephemeral materials of Purgatory. Lynn stretched like an athlete before competition. Daniela stood apart from the group, staring toward the tree with an expression I couldn't quite read. Everyone clear on their role? Raymond asked. We all nodded. Remember, he said, speed is everything. The moment the window opens, we move. Don't stop, don't hesitate, don't look back. The tree is the only thing that matters. We moved into position as the light began its subtle shift, the marker Raymond had identified as the beginning of the vulnerable window. My heart, if I still had a heart in any meaningful sense, hammered against my ribs. This was it. After all the planning, all the preparation, all the justifications, we were finally going to do it. The angels stood in their usual positions around the tree, unmoving, eternal. They didn't acknowledge our approach. They never did, not until you crossed some invisible threshold. Now, Raymond whispered. We ran. The distance collapsed faster than I expected. One moment we were 50 yards out, the next we were within reach. I could see the bark of the tree up close now, see the way it seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. The fruit hung just overhead, so close I could almost taste the promise they represented. Then everything went wrong. The angels didn't attack. That's what still confuses me. They simply shifted. Their forms rippled like water, and suddenly the space around the tree became something else. Somewhere else. Portals opened in the air. Not the violent, aggressive kind I'd seen before, but gentle. Almost welcoming apertures in reality. Mitchell ran straight into one and vanished without a sound. Lynn managed to change direction, but another portal opened directly in her path. She had time for one startled gasp before she was gone. Raymond, driven by whatever obsession had brought him this far, kept running toward the tree. He reached for a low-hanging fruit, his fingers almost brushing the surface. When the light around him intensified, he didn't scream. He just stopped being there. One moment present, the next moment erased, like he'd never existed at all. Daniela slowed to a stop about 10 feet from the tree. A portal opened beside her, offering passage to somewhere else. She looked at it, then at the tree, then at me. "It won't fix what's broken inside you," she said. Then she stepped into the portal and disappeared. And just like that, I was alone. The portals closed. The angels resumed their still positions. The tree waited, patient and eternal, as if none of this had happened at all. I should have run, should have retreated to my gray building and counted myself lucky to still exist in any form. But I'd come too far, invested too much meaning in this attempt. And more than that, for the first time since arriving in Purgatory, I could actually see the tree without obstruction. The fruit hung there, luminous and forbidden. The original sin, they called it. The knowledge that changed everything. I'd always thought that referred to the biblical story, but standing here now, I started to wonder if it meant something else. Something more personal. I took a step forward. The angels didn't move. Another step. The air grew thick, heavy with expectation. When I reached the trunk, I placed my palm against the bark. It felt warm, alive, more real than anything I'd touched since arriving here. The pulse I'd noticed before intensified, like the tree was responding to contact. One of the fruits hung within easy reach. All I had to do was take it. But as I raised my hand, the air around me began to shift. Not aggressively, not violently, but with a kind of terrible gentleness. The gray landscape of Purgatory started to fade, replaced by something I recognized and had been desperately trying to forget. My mother's apartment, the one she'd lived in for the last 20 years of her life, the one I'd visited less and less frequently until I stopped visiting at all. No, I thought. Not this. Anything but this. But the tree doesn't care what you want. It only cares about what you need to see. The vision solidified around me, and I was back in the last place I ever wanted to be, standing at the threshold of all my failures, about to witness exactly what my choices had cost. The apartment materialized around me with cruel precision. Every detail exactly as I remembered it. The worn carpet near the entrance where years of footsteps had faded the pattern. The small table by the door where she always left her keys. The faint smell of lavender from the air freshener she bought in bulk, because it reminded her of her grandmother's garden. I tried to pull back, to return to the gray safety of Purgatory, but the vision held me firm. This wasn't a memory I could dismiss or rationalize away. The tree was making me witness something, and I had no choice but to see it through. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just forgotten how modest everything was. The couch was the same one she'd had for decades, reupholstered twice because she couldn't bear to throw away something that still functioned. Photos covered the walls, family gatherings, holidays, moments frozen in frames. I was in several of them, younger versions of myself smiling at a camera, unaware of who I'd become. Then I saw her. My mother sat in her favorite chair by the window, the one positioned to catch the afternoon light. She was reading, or pretending to read, a book open in her lap. But her eyes kept drifting to the phone on the side table, checking it with a frequency that made my chest tighten. This wasn't a memory from my perspective. I was seeing it from outside, watching her in a moment I'd never witnessed. A moment I should have been present for but chose to miss. The date hovered at the edge of my awareness. Her birthday 3 years before she passed away. The day I'd promised to visit but canceled, because my partner had gotten tickets to some concert I can't even remember now. I'd called her that morning, voice bright with manufactured enthusiasm, explaining that something had come up, that we'd reschedule soon, that I'd make it up to her. She'd said it was fine, told me to have fun. Her voice had been warm, understanding, completely devoid of accusation. Watching her now, I could see what I'd been too self-absorbed to hear in her tone. The slight pause before she responded, the way her hand tightened on the phone. The careful neutrality that masked disappointment so I wouldn't feel guilty. She set the book aside and stood, moving to the kitchen. I followed, a ghost observing my own absence. She opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents. A small cake she'd baked, enough for 2 people. She'd made my favorite, chocolate with vanilla frosting, the same kind she'd made for every birthday since I was a child. For a long moment, she just stood there, refrigerator door open, cold air spilling into the kitchen. Then she carefully removed the cake, cut a single slice, and put the rest away. She ate alone at the kitchen table, fork moving mechanically, her expression distant. When she finished, she washed the plate, dried it, put it away. Then she returned to her chair by the window and picked up her book. The vision shifted, time compressing in that way dreams do. Suddenly it was weeks later, then months. I watched her check her phone with decreasing frequency, watched her stop baking my favorite foods, watched her explain to concerned neighbors that I was busy, that I had my own life, that it was natural for young people to drift away. I understand, she told Mrs. Patterson from across the hall. They have their own priorities now, that's how it should be. But when Mrs. Patterson left, my mother sat in her chair and stared at nothing for an hour. The tree wasn't just showing me moments, it was showing me patterns, the accumulation of small absences that built into something insurmountable. Every missed call, every postponed visit, every choice to prioritize convenience over connection. I wanted to look away, wanted to close my eyes and refuse to witness this. But in this vision, I had no eyelids to close, no escape route to take. I could only watch as my mother's life continued in my absence. Another shift, this time to the hospital. She'd fallen in her apartment, a minor thing, just lost her balance, reaching for something on a high shelf. But at her age, minor things became complicated. Fractured hip, short hospital stay for observation. She'd called me from her hospital bed, voice trying to sound casual as she explained what happened. It's nothing serious, she said. They're just keeping me overnight to be safe. You don't need to come down. I was at a work dinner when she called. Important clients, potential promotion, the kind of thing that felt significant at the time. I'd stepped away from the table, stood in the restaurant hallway, and made my choice. If you're sure you're okay, I said. I've got this work thing that's pretty critical. Of course, she said. Go back to your dinner. I'll be fine. The vision placed me in her hospital room after we hung up. She set the phone down on the bedside table and turned toward the window. The lights of the city glowed beyond the glass, thousands of people living their lives, connected to things and people and purposes. A nurse came in to check her vitals, a young woman with tired eyes and practiced efficiency. Everything looks good, the nurse said. Do you need anything? Want me to call someone? No, my mother said. My son is busy. He has important things to do. The nurse smiled sympathetically. I'm sure he'll visit soon. My mother didn't respond to that. After the nurse left, my mother lay in the dark room, machines beeping softly around her, and I watched her cry. Not dramatic sobs, not theatrical grief. Just quiet tears sliding down her cheeks, the kind of crying people do when they're alone and don't need to perform strength for anyone. I wanted to scream, wanted to reach through time and shake myself, force the past version of me to understand what I was choosing. But the vision held me immobile, forced me to witness the consequences of my convenience. The scene shifted again. Now I was in her apartment, but something was different. The air felt heavier, more final. I noticed the changes immediately. The photos on the walls had been reorganized. Pictures of me had been moved to less prominent positions. replaced with images of friends, distant relatives, her garden. She was packing boxes, moving slowly and carefully. A realtor's card sat on the kitchen counter. Mrs. Patterson knocked on the door, let herself in with the familiarity of long friendship. "Are you sure about this?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Moving to assisted living? You're still so independent." "I'm being practical," my mother said. "If something happens again, I need to be somewhere with support staff. I can't rely on—" She trailed off, then recovered. "I need to be realistic about my situation." What she didn't say echoed louder than words. She couldn't rely on me. Mrs. Patterson helped her pack for a while, making light conversation about the weather, the neighborhood, anything but the obvious sadness of dismantling a home. When she left, my mother sat among the half-filled boxes and picked up her phone. She scrolled through our text history, months of one-sided messages from her, asking how I was, sharing small details about her day, sending photos of things that reminded her of me. My responses were sparse, delayed, often just a thumbs-up emoji or a brief, "busy talk later." She typed a new message. "I'm moving to assisted living next month. The address is—" Her thumb hovered over the send button. Then slowly she deleted the message. She set the phone down and returned to packing. The vision accelerated, days blurring together. I watched her settle into her new place, a small apartment in a facility that tried hard to feel like home but couldn't quite manage it. She made friends, attended activities, maintained her routines. She adapted because that's what she'd always done. But every time someone asked about her family, she'd smile and say, "Oh, my son is very busy. He's doing well." Never blame, never resentment. Just a quiet acceptance that this was how things were now. The tree shifted the vision one final time, and I found myself in a moment I'd never known existed. My mother was sitting in her apartment at the assisted living facility, a letter open in her lap. I couldn't read the words, but I could see the hospital letterhead, could guess at the content from her expression. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She picked up her phone and stared at my name in her contacts. Her finger hovered over it for what felt like an eternity. Then she set the phone down. "He's busy," she said to the empty room. "He's always busy." She never called to tell me she was sick, never wanted to burden me with her problems, never wanted to be the inconvenience that pulled me away from my important life. The vision froze there, held on that image of her sitting alone with knowledge she'd decided not to share. Then slowly, the apartment began to fade. But before it disappeared completely, I felt something change in the air around me. The tree wasn't just showing me memories anymore. It was showing me something else. Suddenly, I was seeing the same moments from a different angle, not as an outside observer, but from my mother's internal perspective. I felt what she felt, understood what she thought. The birthday I missed. She'd been excited for weeks, had planned conversation topics, baked my favorite cake, bought a small gift for me even though it was her birthday. When I canceled, she felt the disappointment like a physical weight, but immediately suppressed it because she didn't want me to feel guilty. She told herself it was fine, that I had my own life, that she was being selfish for wanting my time. The hospital stay, she'd been scared, more frightened than she'd admitted to anyone. The fall had shaken her confidence, made her aware of her fragility. She wanted me there not for practical reasons, but because my presence had always made her feel safe. When I chose work instead, she told herself she understood, that she was proud of my dedication, that she shouldn't need me so much. But lying in that hospital bed, she'd felt profoundly alone. The move to assisted living, she'd seen it as a failure, an admission that she couldn't manage on her own anymore. Part of her had hoped I'd object, offer to help her stay in her apartment, prove that I still cared about her life. When I didn't even know about the move until after it happened, she told herself it was her own fault for not being more direct, for not wanting to impose. The diagnosis, she'd wanted to tell me. Had picked up the phone a dozen times, rehearsed the words, imagined the conversation. But each time she talked herself out of it. I was busy with important things. I had my own life. My own relationship, my own priorities. She didn't want to be the obligation that disrupted all that. She loved me enough to let me live freely, even if that freedom meant living without her. The tree forced me to feel all of this, not as abstract concepts, but as lived experience. I felt her love, unconditional and unwavering despite my absence. I felt her loneliness, carefully hidden behind cheerful phone calls and understanding smiles. I felt her hope, diminishing but never quite extinguished, that someday I'd come back, that the distance between us would close. And I felt the moment she let go. Not dramatically, not with anger or resentment. She just released her expectations, accepted that this was how our relationship would be. She would love me from a distance, support me in whatever ways I'd allow, and never ask for more than I was willing to give. That acceptance hurt worse than any accusation could have. The vision released me suddenly, snapping me back to the present moment in purgatory. I was on my knees before the tree, gasping like I'd been drowning. The fruit still hung overhead, glowing and accessible. All I had to do was reach up and take it. The power was right there. The ability to move forward, to gain strength beyond measure, to finally escape this place and find some kind of resolution. But Daniela's words echoed in my mind. It won't fix what's broken inside you. For the first time since arriving in purgatory, I understood what was actually broken. It wasn't that I'd made a dramatic mistake or committed some unforgivable sin. It was simpler, and somehow worse than that. I'd just not been there. I'd chosen 1,000 times to be anywhere else, to prioritize anything else, to let convenience determine my relationship with the person who loved me most. Not because I didn't love her, but because I'd taken that love for granted, assumed it would always be there waiting whenever I decided to come back to it. The tree's fruit couldn't fix that. Power couldn't fix that. No amount of strength or knowledge or ability could reach back through time and undo absence. The tree showed me what I needed to see, not to redeem me, but to make me finally understand what I'd actually lost. I looked up at the angels standing guard around the tree. They hadn't moved, hadn't reacted to anything that happened. They simply maintained their eternal vigilance, protecting something that apparently didn't need much protection. The souls who ate the fruit and gained power. I understood now why it worked for them. They'd already accepted who they were, already made peace with their choices. The fruit didn't change them. It just gave them the strength to fully become what they'd already chosen to be. But I hadn't chosen anything. I'd just drifted, made the easy decisions, taken the path of least resistance. The tree couldn't give me power because I'd never decided what I wanted that power for. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady. The fruit hung there, still within reach, still offering its terrible gift. My hand rose toward it, trembling. But before my fingers could touch the surface, the tree pulled me into another vision. This one different from the others, not a specific moment, but a montage of small instances I'd completely forgotten. Moments so insignificant they'd barely registered at the time. My mother standing at her kitchen window, watching the street for a car that never arrived. Me, delayed by an hour, then 2, eventually canceling via text because traffic was worse than expected and I was tired. Her carefully selecting items at the grocery store, buying ingredients for dishes I'd mentioned liking months before, just in case I decided to visit. Most of them eventually going bad, thrown away without complaint. The way she'd pause before answering when someone asked about me, that split second of calculation where she decided whether to tell the truth, that we barely spoke anymore, or maintain the fiction that we were close. Holiday dinners where she set a place for me at the table, always leaving it set even after I called to say I wouldn't make it. Just in case you change your mind, she'd say. The place setting would stay there through the entire meal, an empty chair among the gathered family and friends, a physical manifestation of my absence. The tree showed me her nighttime routine, how she'd check her phone one last time before bed, just to see if I'd sent a message. The small spike of hope when the screen lit up, followed by the deflation when it was just a notification from some app or a message from someone else. I saw her talking to her friends, other mothers whose children had moved on with their lives. They'd share strategies for staying connected, Video calls, scheduled check-ins, visits planned months in advance. My mother would nod along, offer advice, but never mention that none of those strategies worked for us because I'd stopped responding to most of her attempts. There was a moment, maybe a year before she passed, when she'd been at a coffee shop with her friend Eleanor. They were discussing their children, and Eleanor had been complaining about her son calling too often, always needing something, never quite independent enough. "I wish he'd give me some space," Eleanor had said, laughing. "Does yours ever let you breathe?" My mother had smiled, stirred her coffee. "Oh, mine gives me plenty of space." Eleanor hadn't caught the sadness in her tone, had just nodded and moved on to another topic. But the tree let me feel what my mother felt in that moment, the ache of pretending her situation was a choice rather than an abandonment, the exhaustion of always having to frame my absence as independence rather than indifference. The vision shifted again, showing me something I'd never considered, how my absence affected her relationship with others. Family gatherings where relatives would ask about me, and she'd have to admit she didn't know what I was up to, hadn't heard from me in weeks. The pitying looks that followed, the careful subject changes, the unspoken judgment about what kind of son I must be. I watched her defend me to Aunt Teresa, who'd never approved of my choices. "He's just busy building his life," my mother said. "That's what young people do. I don't take it personally." But the tree let me feel the lie in those words, the way she very much did take it personally even as she convinced herself she shouldn't. There was a day, I didn't even remember which one, when she'd been sorting through old photos. She found pictures from my childhood, images of us together at parks, museums, beaches. In every photo I was looking at her, or holding her hand, or sitting close beside her. The connection had been so obvious then, so uncomplicated. She'd held one photo for a long time, me at maybe 7 years old, laughing at something she'd said, pure joy on my face. I watched her trace the outline of my younger self with her finger, and I felt what she felt. A profound grief for the simple closeness we'd once shared, mixed with guilt for mourning something I'd clearly outgrown. "He's happy now," she told the photograph. "That's what matters." But the tree wouldn't let me hide from the question underneath those words. Was I happy? Had all those choices I'd made, all those priorities I'd elevated above her actually led to the fulfillment I'd been chasing? The vision pulled me forward to her final months in the assisted living facility. Her health had been declining, though she'd hidden most of it from the staff, not wanting to worry anyone. I watched her struggle through days that grew progressively harder, maintaining her routines with stubborn determination. She'd made friends there, other residents who understood the particular loneliness of outliving your relevance. There was Robert, whose wife had passed and whose children visited religiously every Sunday. There was Margaret, whose daughter called her every morning without fail. There was Thomas, whose son had moved him into the facility and came by several times a week. My mother liked them all, enjoyed their company. But I felt her envy too, carefully suppressed but present nonetheless. She wanted what they had, not the visits themselves, necessarily, but the certainty of being remembered, the security of knowing someone was thinking about her. One afternoon, Robert had invited her to join him and his children for dinner in the common area. It was his granddaughter's birthday, and they'd brought a cake to celebrate. "Where's your son?" Robert's daughter had asked, making conversation. "Will he be joining us?" My mother had smiled, shaken her head. "Oh, he lives quite far away, very busy with his career." The daughter had nodded sympathetically. "It's hard when they move away, but I bet he visits when he can." My mother hadn't corrected her assumption. After dinner, she'd returned to her apartment and sat in the dark. Not crying, not calling anyone, just sitting. The tree let me inhabit that silence, feel the weight of being so completely alone while surrounded by people. She'd thought about reaching out to me that night, had even started composing a message. "I had dinner with some friends today and thought of you. Hope you're well." But she'd deleted it before sending, worried it would seem needy or guilt-inducing or like she was asking for attention she didn't deserve. The tree showed me something else then, the letters she'd written but never sent. pages and pages of them stored in a drawer in her apartment. Letters addressed to me, written over the span of years, each one carefully dated. The tree let me read them, forced me to absorb every word. Some were chatty, full of small news and observations. Others were more vulnerable, admitting loneliness but always framing it as her own issue to manage, never my responsibility to fix. A few were angry, brief flashes of frustration quickly contained, smoothed over with rationalizations and self-blame by the next paragraph. One letter, written about 6 months before she passed, stood out. "Dear son, I want you to know I understand. I really do. You've built a life that makes you happy, and that's all I ever wanted for you. If that life doesn't include me in the way I might have hoped, that's okay. I'm proud of you anyway. I love you anyway. I always will. But I need to tell you something. Just this once, even if I never send this letter. It hurts. Your absence hurts in ways I can't quite articulate. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because I miss you. I miss the person you were, the relationship we had, the simple ease of knowing you. I miss being important to you. I know that's selfish. I know I should be satisfied with the love you've already given me over the years, but I miss you. And I think I'm allowed to admit that to myself, even if I never admit it to you. Love, Mom." The letter had been folded and unfolded multiple times, the creases worn soft. She'd read it often, I realized. Come back to it when the loneliness felt particularly acute. The vision began to fade, but not before showing me one final scene. My mother in her last days lying in the facility's medical wing. She was conscious but weak, her body finally giving out after months of quiet deterioration. The staff had asked if she wanted them to contact anyone. She'd given them my number but specifically requested they not make it sound urgent. "Just let him know I'm here," she'd said. "Don't make him worry." They'd called. I'd been at dinner with friends. I remembered this now, the call coming through while we were looking at dessert menus. I'd glanced at the unfamiliar number, sent it to voicemail, made a mental note to check it later. By the time I'd listened to the message and called back, it was too late. She'd passed quietly in her sleep, alone except for a night nurse who'd held her hand because no one else was there to do it. The tree released me from the vision, and I found myself back at its base, the present moment crashing over me like a wave. My cheeks were wet, I was crying. Actually crying, which I didn't think was possible in this place. The fruit hung above me, glowing with promise. All the power in the world, right there for the taking. But what would I do with it? Storm heaven's gates and demand entry? Force my way into hell and find some kind of purpose? None of that would change what I'd done. None of that would reach back through time and answer those phone calls, visit that hospital room, read those unsent letters. I thought about Daniela, about what she'd said before disappearing. She'd understood something I was only now beginning to grasp. The tree didn't offer escape, it offered truth. And truth without the courage to face it was just another form of torture. Raymond had wanted power to control his fate, but he'd never stopped to ask if he deserved control. Mitchell and Lynn had wanted forward momentum, but they'd never questioned where they were actually trying to go. And me? I'd wanted power because I'd spent my entire life being powerless in the ways that actually mattered. Not powerless to make choices. I'd made plenty of those. But powerless to face the consequences of those choices, to live with what I'd become, to acknowledge the hurt I'd caused through simple, persistent absence. The tree couldn't give me that kind of power. That had to come from somewhere else. I looked at the angels standing guard. They still hadn't moved, still maintained their eternal watch. But for the first time I wondered if they were guarding the tree from us, or guarding us from what we'd do with its fruit if we weren't ready for it. My hand was still raised, still reaching toward the glowing apple above me. All I had to do was close my fingers around it, pull it free, consume it, gain everything I thought I wanted. Instead, I lowered my hand. I lowered my hand and stepped back from the tree. The angels didn't react. The fruit continued to glow. The landscape of Purgatory remained unchanged around me. But something inside me had shifted. some fundamental understanding that I couldn't quite articulate yet but could feel settling into place. I turned away from the tree and started walking. No destination in mind, just movement. My legs felt heavy, like I was pulling myself through water, but I kept going. Past the tree, past the angels who watched without watching, into the gray expanse that stretched endlessly in all directions. The silence here was different now. Before it had felt oppressive, suffocating. Now it just felt like what it was, an absence of noise, a space where thoughts could echo without interruption. I found myself at the bench where Daniela and I used to meet. Someone had carved initials into the wood at some point. Crude letters that might have meant something to someone once. I sat down and stared at the distant glow of heaven's gates. For the first time since arriving in Purgatory, I wasn't trying to figure out how to leave. I was just sitting. Time passed. Minutes or hours, impossible to tell. The light never changed enough to mark its passage. Eventually, I noticed someone approaching from the direction of the gray buildings. An older man, moving with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned to conserve energy. He sat down on the other end of the bench without asking permission, the way people do when they understand that loneliness is the default state here. "You made it back from the tree," he said. It wasn't a question. I glanced at him. His face was weathered, lined with the kind of wear that comes from years of difficult choices. "You know about it." "Everyone knows about it," he said. "Most people just don't get close enough to learn anything useful." We sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "Did you take the fruit?" "No." "Why not?" I thought about how to answer that. Because it wouldn't have fixed anything. He nodded like he'd expected that response. "That's usually how it goes. The people who make it to the tree almost never take the fruit. And the ones who do..." He trailed off, leaving the implication hanging. "What happened to them?" I asked. "They moved on," he said, "found their place whichever direction that was. The tree doesn't judge, it just shows you who you are, and if you can accept that, really accept it, the fruit gives you the strength to fully become it. And if you can't accept it, then you end up back here sitting on benches trying to figure out what comes next." I looked at him more carefully. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough to watch a lot of people come and go," he said. "Long enough to understand that Purgatory isn't actually about waiting for judgment. It's about waiting for yourself to be ready to judge yourself." The words settled over me like a weight. "I don't think I can do that." "Most people can't," he said. "That's why they're here instead of somewhere else." He stood to leave, then paused. "Your friend, the one who disappeared at the tree, she understood something important." "What's that?" "That the thing you're running from is usually the thing you most need to face, and that running gets exhausting after a while." He started walking away, then called back over his shoulder. "There's a place about a mile west of here. Nothing special, just a clearing where the light hits differently. Some people find it helps with thinking. You might try it." Then he was gone, dissolving into the gray distance. I sat on the bench for a while longer, considering his words. The clearing he'd mentioned, I'd passed it before during my early wandering days in Purgatory. It hadn't seemed significant at the time, just another empty space in a landscape full of them. But I had nowhere else to be, nothing else demanding my attention. For the first time in longer than I could remember, my calendar was completely empty. I found the clearing without difficulty. It was exactly as I remembered, a circular space where the ground was slightly different, more solid somehow, and the ambient light did seem to fall at a different angle. A few scattered stones marked the perimeter, worn smooth by time or weather or whatever forces acted on things in this place. I sat down in the center and closed my eyes. The visions from the tree lingered in my mind, not as fresh wounds but as persistent aches. I could still feel my mother's perspective, still sense the accumulated weight of her loneliness. The tree hadn't just shown me what happened. It had forced me to understand what my choices meant to someone else. That was the real power of the fruit, I realized. Not the strength or the visions everyone talked about. The real power was the ability to fully see yourself through others' eyes and not be destroyed by what you found there. Demons could do that, because they'd already embraced being demons. Angels could do it because they'd already aligned themselves with something larger than themselves. But me? I was stuck between those extremes, unable to commit to either path because I'd spent my life avoiding commitment altogether. I opened my eyes and looked up at the unchanging sky. Somewhere beyond it, heaven existed with its perfect light and eternal grace. Somewhere below, hell burned with its absolute certainty and embrace of darkness. And here, in between, purgatory offered neither salvation nor damnation, just the endless opportunity to sit with who you'd become. My mother's unsent letters drifted through my memory. All those words she'd written but never shared. All those feelings she'd experienced but never expressed. She'd loved me enough to let me go, to release me from the obligation of her presence, to suffer her loneliness silently so I could live freely. And I'd taken that gift and mistaken it for permission to forget about her entirely. The worst part wasn't that I'd made a conscious choice to hurt her. The worst part was that I'd made no real choice at all. I'd just drifted, taken the path of least resistance, prioritized convenience over connection until the distance between us became impassable. I thought about Daniela's last words again. It won't fix what's broken inside you. She'd been right. The fruit couldn't fix the fundamental flaw in how I'd lived. The belief that love could be put on hold indefinitely, that people would always be there waiting when I finally got around to them. That absence could be made up for with good intentions and vague promises of next time. But sitting here in this clearing, feeling the weight of everything the tree had shown me, I started to wonder if fixing was even the right goal. Maybe the point wasn't to repair what was broken, but to finally acknowledge that it was broken at all. To stop running from it, stop making excuses for it, stop pretending it was anything other than what it was. I'd abandoned my mother. Not dramatically, not with malice, but steadily and consistently over years of small choices that added up to one insurmountable absence. No amount of power could change that fact. No amount of strength could reach back through time and answer those phone calls, visit that hospital room, sit with her in her loneliness. The only thing I could do was sit here and finally acknowledge what I'd done. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time felt different here in the clearing, more fluid, less insistent. I sat with my memories, with the visions the tree had given me, with the accumulated weight of everything I'd avoided acknowledging. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to change. Not redemption. I wasn't naive enough to think that sitting in a clearing constituted redemption, but something like acceptance maybe, an understanding that this was who I'd been, these were the choices I'd made, and no amount of wishing could alter those facts. The gray landscape around me seemed less oppressive now, or maybe I was just more comfortable with grayness, more willing to exist in the space between absolutes. I thought about the people I'd met here, Raymond with his obsessive planning, Mitchell with his pragmatic opportunism, Lynn with her silent determination, and Daniela with her quiet wisdom. We'd all been looking for the same thing, a way out, a path forward, some kind of resolution to the state we found ourselves in. But maybe purgatory wasn't about finding a way out. Maybe it was about learning to exist in the in-between, to sit with uncertainty and discomfort without constantly scrambling for escape. The old man had been right about one thing. Purgatory was about waiting for yourself to be ready to judge yourself, and I was starting to understand what that judgment might look like. I stood up slowly, my body stiff from sitting. The clearing looked the same as when I'd arrived, but I felt different. Not healed, not redeemed, but something closer to honest. I started walking back toward the tree, not because I'd changed my mind about taking the fruit, but because I needed to see it one more time, needed to confirm my decision. The journey back felt shorter than the journey away had been, or maybe I was just more certain of my direction now. The tree came into view, magnificent and terrible, its fruit glowing with patient promise. The angels still stood guard, eternal and immovable. Nothing had changed about the scene, but I was seeing it differently now. I approached slowly, cautiously, expecting another vision to pull me under. But the tree remained simply a tree, Present, powerful, but passive. It had shown me what I needed to see. The rest was up to me. I stopped a few feet from the trunk and looked up at the fruit. They were beautiful in a way that made your chest ache, promising everything you thought you wanted if you could just reach high enough to grasp them. But I understood now what Daniela had understood. Some things can't be grasped. Some absences can't be filled. Some choices can't be unmade. The power the fruit offered, the strength of demons, the vision of angels, it would let me move forward. Yes. Let me choose heaven or hell, light or darkness, salvation or damnation. But it wouldn't change the fundamental truth the tree had forced me to see. I'd spent my mother's final years choosing everywhere else but with her, and no amount of power could make that okay. I reached into my pocket, or the approximation of a pocket in whatever form I existed in now, and pulled out something I hadn't realized I was carrying. A photo, worn at the edges, faded with age. Me and my mother, from when I was maybe 10 years old. We were at some park, both smiling at the camera, her arm around my shoulders. I didn't remember putting this photo in my pocket, didn't remember having it at all, but here it was, solid and real in my hand. I looked at it for a long time, studying the easy closeness we'd once shared, the uncomplicated love that had existed before I'd learned to prioritize other things. Then I did something I hadn't done since arriving in Purgatory. I cried. Not the desperate tears from the visions, but something quieter, more honest. Grief for what I'd had and thrown away, for the person who'd loved me unconditionally and received so little in return, for all the moments I could have chosen differently but didn't. When the tears finally stopped, I carefully placed the photo at the base of the tree. It seemed right somehow to leave it there, a small acknowledgement, a tiny memorial to what I'd lost through my own neglect. I stepped back and looked at the tree one final time. The fruit still hung there, glowing and accessible. I could still take one if I wanted. The power was still available, the choice still present. But I'd made my decision. I turned away from the tree and started walking. Not toward heaven's gates. I wasn't ready for that. Might never be ready for that. Not toward hell's entrance, that felt too much like giving up entirely. Instead, I walked toward the space between them, the gray expanse where Purgatory stretched endlessly in all directions. There was a spot I'd noticed before, during my wandering days. A place where you could see both heaven and hell from the same vantage point, could watch the light and darkness existing in tension with each other. It was just a small rise in the landscape, nothing special, but it felt like the right place to be. I reached it as the light was doing its subtle shift, the closest thing Purgatory had to dusk. I sat down on the ground and looked out at the view. To my left, heaven's gates glowed with their perfect light. To my right, hell's entrance smoldered in its eternal darkness. And here, in between, I existed in the gray space that belonged to neither. For the first time since arriving in Purgatory, I didn't feel the desperate need to move toward one destination or the other. I was content, if that was even the right word, to simply sit here, holding the weight of what I'd learned, acknowledging what I'd done, existing in the space of permanent in-between. A single apple rolled across the ground in front of me, coming to rest against my foot. I looked down at it, surprised. It must have fallen from the tree somehow, traveled this distance through means I didn't understand. I picked it up and held it in my hand. The fruit was warm, pulsing with that same inner light I'd seen in the tree. All the power in the world, right here in my palm. I sat there for a long time, feeling its weight, considering what it represented. Then, gently, I set it down on the ground beside me. The fruit continued to glow for a moment, then its light began to fade. Slowly, gradually, it became just an apple. Still beautiful, still perfect, but no longer radiating that terrible promise. I watched it return to ordinariness, and something inside me settled into place. I wasn't taking the easy way out, wasn't choosing power as a shortcut past accountability, wasn't eating the fruit to forget what the tree had shown me. Instead, I was choosing to sit here, in this gray space, carrying the weight of what I'd done. Not as punishment, not as penance, but simply as acknowledgement. Some absences can't be filled. Some choices can't be unmade. Some hurts can't be healed. All you can do is recognize them, sit with them, and learn to exist alongside the truth of who you've been. The light continued its subtle shift, moving through Purgatory's approximation of evening. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear faint sounds, other souls moving through their own journeys, making their own choices, finding their own way to whatever came next. But I stayed where I was, sitting between heaven and hell, holding the weight of my mother's unanswered love, finally understanding what it meant to be truly seen. The apple beside me had completely lost its glow now, becoming just fruit, just matter, just another object in this strange landscape. I picked it up one more time and looked at it. Then I stood and walked back toward the tree. The angels watched as I approached, but they didn't move to stop me. I walked right up to the trunk and carefully placed the apple back at its base, next to the photo I'd left earlier. "I don't want the power," I said quietly, though I wasn't sure if anyone was listening. "I just want to remember. I want to sit with what I did and who I was, and not run from it anymore." The tree didn't respond. Trees don't, even magical ones. But as I turned to walk away, I felt something shift in the air, not dramatically, not with thunder or proclamation, but subtle as a change in temperature. The angels remained at their posts, eternal guardians of something that apparently needed guarding from people like me, people who weren't ready for its truth. I walked back to my spot between destinations and sat down again. The view hadn't changed. Heaven still glowed to the left, hell still smoldered to the right, and purgatory still stretched gray and endless in all directions. But I felt different. Not redeemed, not forgiven, not absolved, just present. Finally willing to exist in the space I'd earned, carrying the weight I'd accumulated, acknowledging the hurt I'd caused. My mother would never know I'd reached this understanding, would never hear me finally admit what my absence had meant, would never receive the apology she'd deserved, but never demanded. But maybe that was appropriate. I'd made her bear the weight of my choices in life. The least I could do was bear the weight of those choices in death. I settled into my spot, found a position I could maintain, and looked out at the landscape. Other souls moved in the distance, each on their own journey, each carrying their own weight. Some would find their way to heaven's gates. Others would descend toward hell, and some, like me, would find their place in the gray space between. That was okay. That was, in fact, exactly where I belonged. I sat there as time passed in its strange, non-linear way. Days or weeks or months or years, measurement didn't really matter here. What mattered was the sitting itself, the acknowledgement, the willingness to finally stop running and just exist with the truth. The photo remained at the base of the tree, a small memorial to love given freely and received carelessly. The apple remained beside it, a symbol of power refused in favor of something harder and more honest. And I remained here, in my spot between destinations, finally understanding that some journeys don't have endings. They just have the courage to stop pretending they're going somewhere else. The gray light of purgatory settled over everything, neutral and unchanging. I sat in it, breathing its stale air, existing in its timeless present, carrying my mother's absence like a stone in my chest. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't even peace. But it was honest. And after a lifetime of avoiding honesty, that felt like enough. I closed my eyes and let the weight settle fully, let myself feel every ounce of what I'd earned. When I opened them again, nothing had changed. Nothing needed to. I was exactly where I belonged, holding exactly what I deserved to hold, finally done running from the truth of who I'd been. And in this gray, endless space between salvation and damnation, that understanding felt something like home.